Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Mythbusting Low Carbon Fuels and Vehicle Compatibility. For those of you that I don't know, I'm Shahana McKenzie, the CEO of Bioenergy Australia and the founder of the Low Carbon Fuels Alliance of Australia and New Zealand. Bioenergy Australia is the non-profit industry association for Australia's future bioeconomy. And today we are tackling some of the most persistent myths around vehicle compatibility, regulatory compliance, around low carbon fuels for vehicles. And we have some fantastic speakers joining us today. Before we begin, I would like to pay my respects to the local Indigenous people. I'm here in Canberra, which is the land of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. And I would like to pay my respect to the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on, but also of the land that everybody is joining us from today. So a couple of little housekeeping matters for today. Make sure that you introduce yourself and where you're watching from in the chat box, and use the Q&A box for any questions for our speakers. In the chat box, if you pop any questions into the chat box, it actually won't make its way through into the Q&A. So we do need you to pop it into that section. So to kick things off today, we have a number of speakers. Our first speaker today is Barbara Kiss. Barbara is from Kiss Regulatory Consulting, and she's going to be speaking about vehicle compatibility and compliance with her perspective and background from the US at General Motors. Barbara brings a wealth of experience from a distinguished career at General Motors, one of the world's largest automotive manufacturers. During her time at GM, she developed expertise across vehicle production, automotive strategy, and industry innovation. Now leading her own consultancy firm, Barbara's global perspective and industry insights make her a valuable voice on the future of mobility and the evolving automotive landscape. Welcome, Barbara. Over to you.
How about that? I'm off mute and I'm going to share. Let's see if it works. So far, so good. You can all hear me. Somebody say, yes, you can hear me. Yes? Good?
Yes, we sure can.
We're good. All right, great. So let's just start with, you can see my screen and you'll note down here in the past, and even the title of my presentation is yesterday for you. So I'm coming to you from the Detroit area from the past. And actually, that's going to be some of my presentation, right? I'm going to talk to you all about some stuff that happened here and how it applies to what's going on in this space there. So I'm going to talk about low carbon fuels, vehicle compatibility. Primarily, I'm going to talk about ethanol. I have a little bit of biodiesel expertise, but my presentation is focused primarily on the ethanol angle and aspect. So let's see if I can go to the first slide, coming to you from the past, right? Who am I? We switch to the first slide. I'm Barbara Kiss. I'm a chemical engineer. I spent the vast majority of my career with General Motors and General Motors Trade and Lobby Association. So I'll talk a little bit about the trade group because that comes into play as I talk about some of these myths and what's happening. So I started in this space back in the 90s. But I will tell you very quickly, I moved into the policy space. So I was the director of policy for energy and environment at General Motors for about 2 decades. So essentially every regulatory negotiation in the environmental space, whether it was laws that were made by Congress or notice of proposed rulemakings and final rules that came through from the Environmental Protection Agency or the California Air Resources Board, essentially everything that affected vehicles for about the last 3 decades, I worked on the regulation directly with the government and helped to negotiate things that made sense from an automaker, an OEM, an original equipment manufacturer standpoint. I did such a good job with that leadership said, Barbara, you've kind of negotiated everything, criteria pollutants, CAFE, fuel economy, greenhouse gas, the test procedures, the fuel. Can we move into different parts of the fuels as a system and EVs and test procedures for EVs? And apparently I did such a good job, they said, go and run the department that needs to implement these requirements. So right? Now I'm no longer talking to regulators to figure out how we might do something 5 years in the future. I've got a regulation, the bed that I made, now I need to go and lie in it with 10 times as many staff. I had about 10 people down in policy, I had about 100 people in certification and compliance. That's homologation for all the rest of us. So, at a very high level, I'm going to go my next slide. I'm going to tell you what it says before I go to it. I'm going to give you the answers to all of this from an ethanol perspective. I'll give you the answers and then I'll tell you why the answers are there. So, at a very high level, my three takeaways are there needs to be an E10 mandate nationwide across Australia right now, today. That's the answer. It should be an E10 mandate across the entire country at the federal level. It's not going to damage any vehicles. It's absolutely going to help with the fuels issues, the energy sovereignty issues. It will help on that front. You'll have more there. It's already in use everywhere else. That's it in a nutshell. We can stop my presentation now. I've got other data I'll show you, but that's it. You just need to move to E10. So, with one minor exception, you're going to hear, and you've heard from lots of folks, that for vehicles made 2000 and later, essentially the last 25, 27 years or model years or so, it's fine. If you're driving around a 1977 Pontiac Trans Am, you should call me and we'll be friends. But I would not put E10 in that vehicle. Older vehicles have some issues and they need to remain able to. And we have classic cars here in the US, obviously, those still need to be fueled on E0. Everywhere else in the rest of the world uses E10 for compliance purposes. So I'm going to go on and I'll go through this slide very quickly. This is kind of a history of ethanol in the US. There's a little note up there at the top because you will hear from me as I present some of this data and go back and forth. I will interchangeably use E10 and E15. I know that those are two very different things, right? 50% more ethanol in E15 than E10. But the work that was done here in the US, both by EPA and the Department of Energy and everyone else, over this time frame, it was a movement of additional mid-level blends. So I'll use those somewhat interchangeably. Again, I'll go back to my recommendation for all of Australia at the federal level. There should be an E10 mandate. It should be the base fuel across the country. All right, so back in the 70s, we had gas lines and the oil embargo, and that grew CAFE and fuel economy regulations here. And we started to use some ethanol. Then in the mid 2000s, there was this Energy Policy Act that created the renewable fuel standard that mandated that 10% ethanol needed to go into the fuel. And so very quickly, the infrastructure was retrofitted. And in a very short order, nearly all urban gas stations were ready to go at E10. And it took the urban, the rural, the outlier gas stations a little bit longer. There was refinery optimization where there was some sub-octane, and then the greater octane from ethanol was added, and that all just leveled out. And currently we've stabilized with the US using about 14 billion gallons of ethanol that we're making right here. That's my point to you all as well. With the ethanol that's being made in Australia, you should be using it in Australia. Okay, I'm going to move on to, wait, we can't do that one. I got to give you a heads up first. Okay, so as this debate was raging in the US in 2000, there were a lot of myths that were brought out, a lot of comments, many of which were not good. I'm going to give you some actual quotes that were from speeches and others from folks in that time. And in the US, we have the API, the American Petroleum Institute, and AFPM, the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers. Those are two trade organizations for the oil companies in the US. And so much of the speaking came directly from those leaders. In the US, also the original equipment manufacturers also spoke through their trade groups as well. And so let's talk about what was said. I kind of highlighted some of these in yellow. Right, the group director of API at the time said engine failures, everyone's going to get stranded, and costly repairs. The AFPM president, Charles Drevna, said, no. EPA should not be running a giant science experiment, essentially the 17 million units on the road, Don't run a giant science experiment on my neighbor's car. Go and do a structured in a laboratory experiment, because that's your job to go and protect the public. And then once those results came out, we had some other words from Bob Greco that said, you know what, we're the oil industry. Our ads are going to focus on the truth, and they're going to focus on the negative consequences of what happens and the unexpected repair bills. We'll get to the repairers in a minute. Um, and even the original equipment manufacturers, the OEMs, the car makers, we're kind of juggling, do we like ethanol or not? And so there was this headline out of Green Car Reports. I will tell you that none of these things came true. Well, the government did do a study, and I'm going to tell you about that, but there weren't stranded customers and these costly repairs. Let me show you what happened from that. There were no issues. The federal government went off and they did a study. It's the Department of Energy, in the executive branch, Oak Ridge National Labs. You can see here it says intermediate ethanol blends. That's why I made the point, and we referred to it at the time between E10, E15, right? They're very similar with respect to what happens in vehicles and how those things act. So, as a result of the Department of Energy report that came out in 2012, the US EPA said, yep, we're going to move forward with our technical assessment. And so, similar to like you do a consultation and then there's some discussion with stakeholders, and then ultimately there's the final requirements. In the US, we have a notice of proposed rulemaking. There's some amount of that stakeholder engagement and back and forth. This was one of the pieces that happened during the stakeholder engagement, but it was specifically set up by the government to go off and do this work to prove off some of these points. And what you can see happened here is there was no structural behavioral change between E0 and E15. There was no accelerated degradation of the fuel system in any way, either the metals or the elastomers, the plastic, the rubber, the gaskets. And there were no fuel pump failures that were directly attributable to ethanol content for vehicles that were made from the time frame we're talking about, 2000 and beyond. Also, there's the added benefit. I did mention that I worked on a lot of air quality issues, criteria pollutant emissions, spent a lot of my career negotiating those regulations. Carbon monoxide and non-methane hydrocarbons both decreased, as would be expected in this study. And so those are a handful of the results. Let me see. I think I got maybe two more slides. Okay, and so one of the claims is maybe, well, you're going to void your warranty, or if I put E10 in my vehicle, I went and grabbed a handful of these. Are all over the place. I got a 2013. Toyota doesn't actually have right now an owner's manual. There's an app. You can get all the information there. There's actually a lot of logic there. We spent all kinds of time reviewing owner's manuals and updating them every year. And here's Mazda as well. These are all in place. Let me tell you one other quick thing about being the certification director. We don't like proliferation, right? We'd like to make one good thing that covers everything. Else I need to test everything twice or 4 times or 8 times. And so it's already done. So here's the last slide. What do I think should happen? Like I said at the beginning, there should be an E10 mandate across the entire country, and it should just be done, and you move forward with it. And then I would add on to it an educational campaign that would come from it, led by the government, with some kind of a PSA. I just made up one here. It's not very sexy. We should come up with a better one. E10 is great. And so that would be the message coming from both the government, but then everyone else that's working in this space as well. I think Stavros is going to talk a little bit about the repairers, and so that same messaging could be combined there as well. And in the US, we had some very strict pump labeling requirements. So I'm going to stop talking. That's it. I'm really quick, and I'll be around for questions at the end.
Thanks, Barbara. Really appreciate it. And yes, please make sure you are popping those questions into the Q&A so that we can make sure that everything that you want to know is getting answered at the end of the session. So next up, we have Stavros and he's the CEO of the Motor Traders Association of New South Wales and ACT. Stavros is a prominent figure in New South Wales automotive and transport industry through his work with the MTA New South Wales and ACT, representing over 3,000 corporate members. He has been a strong advocate for the state's motor traders, working across policy, training, and industry development. Stavros brings a practical, on-the-ground understanding of the challenges facing dealers, repairers, and transport businesses across the state. Welcome, Stavros.
Yes, good morning and thank you. And thanks for the introduction. As I said, Stavros Yallouridis, I'm the Chief Executive Officer. I've been in the automotive industry basically all my life. I've worked across many OEMs, both in Australia and Europe. And today, for the last almost 10 years, I've been heading up the Motor Trade Association of New South Wales. Can my car take this fuel? Well, I'm here for the repairers. The MTA represents the workshops and the businesses and the motors that actually trust with their cars. And that gives us a particular stake in this "can my car take it" question. My proposition is simple. The barrier to ethanol and biofuels in Australia is not just engineering, it's the perception, and the perception is shaped at the counter by the people like our members. I'll be straight about the history too, because there is an elephant in the room and the repairing trade should be the one to name it out. Just let me go to the next slide. Okay. So the voice of the motor industry, that's who we are. We represent, as mentioned earlier, over 3,000 businesses across New South Wales and the ACT, ranging from, the big car dealers all the way down to, small mechanical repairers, body shops across the state, petrol stations, service stations, etc. We have a code of ethic. We uphold a code of ethic for our members, which means it's actually there to protect the consumer, so that when they come into a member to get their car serviced, they're dealing with someone they can trust and get the right advice and information and get the right repairs done to their vehicles. Founded in 1910, as mentioned, over 3,000 businesses across the ACT, New South Wales and the ACT. We advocate, we provide employment relations. We're a strong voice for the industry, regardless if they're members of the MTA or not. We're an industry-led motor industry. We advocate heavily with government to try to shape the future regarding the modern automotive vehicle in today. Well, for many years, mechanics have warned consumers and customers about, not really against the ethanol, right? And I think that's something that we've been carrying for many, many years, and it's something that we need to really change. It wasn't stupid in the old days because it was an issue with, carburetor vehicles, technology prior to 2000, and it could have done some problems. But today, as we mentioned, since 2000, the world's changed, the technology's changed, and E10 is a much better fuel than what was previously there. You remember we moved from a standard fuel and we had a super fuel, for those who were a little bit older, and we moved away and we ended up having the unleaded fuel, which is also something that was new at the time and a disruptor in the industry. And today we're talking about E10. We're not talking about unleaded fuel, and we're not talking about super fuel or standard fuel. Every car is built today for this fuel. The reference is the Euro 6 emission. I think came out after Euro 5 around 2014. It's an E10 on 95 RON, and the cars in Australia and the cars the Australians are driving today are the cars that are certified for these fuels, not just in Australia, but globally. If you can see in here that the identical models that are certified to run on E10 are the B5 and B20 biodiesels in the UK, US and EU and across Asia today. I think Barbara mentioned a bit more of the blends of it, but it is a case today where I think in the States, 98% of the fuel sold there are ethanol. And again, which we'll repeat us several times, and Barbara's repeated it as well. Since 2000, every car that's been bought into Australia or manufactured after 2000 can work off ethanol. All you have to do is open your petrol flap of your car. There'll be a sticker there. If you're unaware of that, get on the website. You can ask your manufacturers. There is no issues with running on E10. So what customers fear and what is actually true? Will E10 damage my car? Obviously not. We've talked about that. It is the situation today, and manufacturers are spending billions of dollars on engine technology today in research, and they approve it. So there is no issue there. Is it no good for older cars? Well, every car in Australia sold up 2000 is approved for E10. Manufacturers compatibility are listed public. You can go on the website and have a look if you've got a car prior to that or after 2000 and see if it's compatible. Biodiesel corrodes and clogs. Well, B5 and B20 across the globe, diesel fleets, basically modern diesels are built to handle it today. So we don't have any complications. We don't have any technical issues. And I think the manufacturers with their warranty claims don't have any issues regarding fuel quality. Do I lose power and economy? Well, real world differences are marginal. There are some tests that have been done, but the price and the fuel security gains outweigh them. So there was some tests that, for example, I got an extra 50 kilometers out of my tank running on 98, for example, rather than running on E10. But if you look at the cost of filling a fuel on E10, running it over a lengthy period of time, the benefits outweigh the gain, that's for sure. Well, we know and we see it every day with our members and the industry and the consumers. Can my car take E10? That's the question that comes across to the workshop, to the owners in the business. It's questions that are confronted on a daily basis. But what's really the most important thing here is that the motorists are actually trusting their repairer. So if the repairer is providing the wrong information, not understanding what's happened, hasn't caught up to speed with what's going on, and selling the fact that E10 is no good, well, that is a problem. And I think that's something that I'll touch on a little bit later on. We have to change. We are champions about the way we communicate to the market, to the consumers, through our members, the confidence about the E10 in the aftermarket. We also know and work very closely with the OEMs, and we know that the technology today on all the engines after 2000 can accommodate the E10. So we need to get that across to the repairers as well. Again, at the counter, the counter cards, the fact sheets, the workshop decal, we need to provide a different channel of communication so that we have consistency across the industry. So when consumers walk into a business to get their car serviced or to a petrol station, there's one voice in terms there's trust. We need to build the trust to the consumers that E10 and to the government that E10 is the fuel of what's required in the industry today. Look, this is an area where it gets a little bit technical, but basically, as I mentioned earlier, that E10 is across the US, the UK, 17 EU member states. It's mandated in 65 plus countries. Australia has no mandate with ethanol, and it's only around 1% of the total fuel sales at the moment. So we need to work on that, definitely. We have the capacity. There's some figures there. We can produce around 470 million litres of fuel. We need to need to address those sort of issues. And the policy moving forward, obviously, New South Wales has mandated 6% on the ethanol. The federal budget, as we all know, that's come out more recently, demand new measures, and we're working very closely to try to get that across the line. And I think my final slide is just a couple of things to take away from this webinar workshop. Almost certainly, yes. Every passenger car sold in Australia since 2000 approved for E10. If in doubt, check with the maker. It's listed in, or ask your repairer. The old warnings have changed. The caution was right for older and modified vehicles, but for the fleets, cars on the road today, this no longer applies. We've changed the way we are doing technology today. E10 is a quality fuel. It's got a higher octane, cleaner burning grade, and right now it's the cheaper one. Many drivers are paying a lot more to avoid it, which sounds a little bit silly for me. The barriers is the perception and not the engineering. Hesitancy is driven by fear. The evidence does not support. Repairers are the fix. As the voice motorists trust, the aftermarket can help build confidence where it matters most. It's a perceptional thing. We need a lot of work to do on the ground, and we need to do it at all areas and all aspects of the repair industry in Australia. That's my presentation. I think I was on time. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Stavros. Really appreciate you joining us today. Our next speaker is a bit of a friend of Bioenergy Australia, and we've been working with Mark for a few years now. So Mark is the Chief Technical Officer from the Truck Industry Council, and he's going to speak from the truck manufacturer's perspective in relation to predominantly biodiesel and renewable diesel. So Mark Hammond is a leading voice in Australia's trucking and road transport sector through his role at the Truck Industry Council. He brings extensive knowledge of the industry's key challenges and opportunities, including fleet technology, emission standards, and supply chain efficiency. Mark is a respected advocate for the advancement of the heavy vehicle industry and a welcome contributor to conversations shaping its future. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much, Shahana, for the invite today and that warm introduction. Yes, Shahana said I'm the Chief Technical Officer at the Truck Industry Council, and I want to talk today a bit about compatibility, but I think B5 is far more accepted in the heavy vehicle fleet. I want to talk a bit more about why we really need renewable fuels and a B5 mandate to decarbonise the heavy vehicle sector. So just quickly, the Truck Industry Council is the peak body representing truck manufacturers. We do still manufacture trucks in Australia, importers and distributors of heavy commercial vehicles in Australia above 3.5 tonne GVM. We have 18, members represent 18 brands. Last year, our members provided about 97% of all new trucks and heavy vans sold in the Australian market. And our positioning statement is today's trucks safer, greener, and essential. Oh, excuse me. There are member brands. The 4 brands in the orange box at the bottom are not truck manufacturers, but they're engine or driveline manufacturers. But you can see from all the other logos there, we represent sort of all the major brands of truck and heavy vans sold in Australia. Just a bit of background of the size of the industry here in Australia. Currently about 770,000 trucks and heavy vans on Australian roads. That's vehicles above 3.5 tonne GVM. That's expected to climb to about 850,000 by 2030 due to the ever-growing freight task. And I'll talk a bit about electric vehicles, which might seem a bit odd initially, but and it sort of it justifies, I guess, or explains exactly why we really need to look at low carbon liquid fuels in our sector. So last year, about 1% of new truck sales were low or zero emissions. So about 60% of that 1% was BVs and 40% were diesel electric hybrids. And those sales were up 22% over 2024. And I'd point out that the overall market last year for heavy trucks declined about 15%. So new and low and zero emission sales are on the increase. But of those 770,000 trucks on the road, only about 1,000 of them are battery electric at the moment. So that means about 99.9% of trucks and heavy vans in our fleet are still diesel powered. The average age of a truck in Australia is just over 15 years. So that's average age, so a total life of 30 years. So a new truck sold today will not be retired from the fleet until 2056. So the problem that we have is we have a substantially diesel fleet that's not going to go away anytime soon. Back to this slide of the OEMs. The green circles there indicate brands that have battery electric trucks for sale in Australia at the moment. The blue circle is a diesel electric hybrid. So there's plenty of product. Those two members are currently sort of trialing battery electric vehicles and plan to launch them this year. And we have a couple of non-tick members who are also offering truck and heavy vans. So there's a plethora of battery electric vehicles out there, but uptake is quite slow. All the sales of battery electric trucks are going into a metro urban freight task where they're back to base overnight and can be charged. The reality is in Australia that line haul type operations are just not particularly or not at all suited really to a battery electric truck. And that leads to those sectors like line haul, remote area, and mass constrained freight that battery electric vehicles are just simply not suited to at the moment. The technology, while it will work, is just not economically viable when you compare it to a diesel truck in those operations. And another point that's quite interesting about the Australian truck market or truck industry is that 90% of trucking businesses operate 5 or less trucks. So a lot of us are used to seeing the Tolls and the Linfoxes, the TNT trucks, and we think that a lot of our freight is owned by those large corporations. But by far the majority of trucks out there are operated by small businesses with 5 or less trucks. And if you're an operator, a small operator who's only got 5 trucks, and you take a gamble, if you like, on a single electric truck, and that truck doesn't live up to your expectations, then that's 1 in 5 or 20% of your business that's underperforming. If you're an operator with only a couple of trucks and you decide to replace one of those with a battery electric truck at the moment and that underperforms, I'm not saying it will, but if it does, then that's half of your business that's underperforming. So what we're seeing is that those 90% of businesses are not the ones that are buying or even looking at sort of battery electric trucks. It's only the larger fleets that are looking at running sort of a battery electric truck at the moment. So that means uptake is slow. We are very optimistically forecasting that by 2030, that 1 in 5 new truck sales will be battery electric. That would see about 10,000 new trucks put on the road in 2030. It would mean that optimistically we'd see about 20,000 battery electric trucks on our roads by 2030 in total. That's still only 2% of the fleet, and it'll actually only abate about 1% of carbon, because those trucks are displacing diesel trucks predominantly running around in metro urban areas. And those diesel trucks that have been taken off the road and replaced by battery electric are not actually burning a lot of diesel. Most diesel in the heavy road freight industry is burnt sort of on line haul, and we don't have a battery electric or a zero emission solution for those trucks at the moment, or not a viable one. So we're actually not going to see a great deal of carbon abatement from our industry. 98% of the trucks sort of on our roads in 2030 will still require diesel. So while we must foster the deployment of low and zero emission trucks, we need to decarbonise the existing truck fleet. That's the only way we're going to see some short to mid-term CO2 reductions in the fleet. So we've done some modelling from 2025 to 2030. That red bar at the bottom indicates how much more CO2 those new trucks that we'll be putting on the road between sort of now and 2030 will emit. So just over 2.5 million tonnes of additional CO2 than where we were at the beginning of 2025. And we've looked at different abatement technologies. So the first three there, we've got hydrogen trucks. We see that they will have no real effect at all. Euro 6 trucks are more fuel efficient, and we'll see about 150,000 of those put on the road between 25 and 2030. But they're, because the gains in fuel efficiency are only small, even though the numbers are relatively large, it's not going to make a dent on sort of CO2 emissions. Neither will diesel electric hybrids, mainly because we've only got one player in the market who's selling those trucks. And while they're 20 to 25% more CO2 efficient, they'll probably only be about 20,000 on our roads. So not a significant sort of reduction in CO2. If we look at those optimistically predicted 20,000 BEV trucks, that's about the amount of CO2 that those trucks will save by 2030. Freight productivity is one that I think that we need to be considering a lot more in Australia. We run a lot of semi-trailers, so single trailers still on line haul. If we were to move just 10% of that freight from single trailers into B doubles, you can see that there's a reasonable CO2 saving, and certainly greater than putting almost twice the result of putting 20,000 BEVs on our roads. And low carbon fuels. So if we had a B5 mandate, assuming that B5 abates 80%, or was 80% efficient in terms of its CO2 abatement, that's the CO2 benefits we'll get by running that B5 fuel across our entire heavy vehicle fleet. It's about 5 times as effective as putting 20,000 BEVs on the road. And I think probably a lot more achievable. Just quickly, if we were to look at how many battery electric vehicles we'd have to put on our roads to get the same abatement as that B5 mandate, it's close to 100,000. So let's say we've got 1,000 BEVs on our road at the moment. To go from that to 100,000 by 2030 is obviously very impractical. It gives you an idea of the size of the problem, but it also gives you an idea of just how effective low carbon liquid fuels are. So our best short-term to mid-term solution is low carbon fuels. We have an existing biodiesel industry in Australia. We just need to reboot it. Talking about compatibility, B5 is fully supported by all truck manufacturers and heavy van manufacturers. There's no issues around warranty. Well, warranty is not affected. Service intervals are not affected in any way. You can run B5 in any truck, old or new. It can be a 30-year-old truck and it'll happily run on a B5. It can be a brand new truck that you take delivery of today and you can run it on B5. No questions asked. B5 should add less than 5 cents to a litre of fuel. That is based on sort of, pre-war in the Middle East assumptions. Putting bio into diesel at the moment will actually probably reduce the price of a litre of diesel slightly. And we think a mandate's required because we've seen sort of in the ethanol industry with petrol and with biodiesel, the big fuel companies are not that interested in putting bio into fuel unless it's mandated. it has all the other benefits of increasing our fuel security, jobs in regional Australia, etc., etc. So we think a B5 mandate is a bit of a no-brainer. And just to wrap this up, so we see that moving forward, probably the end game, particularly sort of for metro distribution for trucks, will be battery electric. We need to be, or government need to be putting infrastructure in sort of to take advantage of those BEV savings, and so they can be realised in a reasonable way from 2030, 2035 and onwards. Freight consolidation and productivity are also viable pathways that we need to explore in terms of reducing CO2 for line haul operations. The biodiesel and renewable diesel offer by far the best carbon abatement solution for trucks and heavy vans between now and 2035, and likely beyond for those hard to abate sectors like line haul, remote, and the mass constrained freight that will be penalised if you're carrying a bunch of batteries around on a truck. We need to start this process by rebooting the Australian biodiesel industry, and TIC believes that a B5 mandate's essential. And I'll just finish by saying, I think supporting other abatement measures, and I guess this is a bit of a dig at hydrogen at the moment, are quite questionable at this point in time. Hydrogen potentially has a place, but I think it's a decade or more away. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. And thank you to all of the speakers that we've had today. So we're now going to jump into a little bit of Q&A where I get to ask some of the questions out of the chat and also some questions that I have. So I'll ask the speakers to take their mics off mute when I throw to you. So Barbara, I'm probably going to start with you. The statistic that kind of blows my mind is that 98% of petrol that is sold in the US today contains 10% ethanol. Like, that's quite remarkable, considering Australia, we're less than 1%, right? So insanity. What was the move? What happened in the US? How did it get to that position and that place? And what was the kind of, the trigger that really moved it to that significant amount?
So you're absolutely right. It is prolific. It's everywhere. You can go to the gas station down the corner. That's what you're going to find. It was driven by regulatory policies, by air quality and global warming, greenhouse gas abatement related concerns. So as that started, right, you take the fuel and the vehicle together as a system, and then you have to look at those together. There was a sort of a related question that kind of came in the chat about the environmental benefits, and I talked on it just briefly when I got started. I kind of zoomed past my intro slide and wanted to show you some of the pictures there. I helped the team here work on the NVES, the NVES program 2 years ago. We were fairly successful there, and that was driven by those same sort of global concerns. In the US, it was focused very much on criteria pollutants, right? So kind of the big five. I talked about two of them. I talked about carbon monoxide. I talked about non-methane hydrocarbons, and E10 was better for both of those. There's the big particulate matter. It's better for particulate matter as well. NOx and SOx, so nitrogen oxides, and SOx is not an issue within the automotive space, but it is kind of a wash or slightly worse for NOx. And let me just talk a little bit about maybe the elephant here. There are less carbon atoms in ethanol than there are in gasoline. Just if you look at a molecule of gasoline and a molecule of ethanol. So there is slightly less range performance when using E10, but it's about 3%. And I dare anyone, unless you are recording your mileage and recording your liquid levels and recording your costs on a term sheet on a regular basis, you're not going to see the 3%. If you drive very angry, you'll get worse than 3%. So the reality is the environmental benefit from moving here was realized in the US, and then it was made to go forward with a mandate, and the environmental benefit is the same in Australia as it would be here.
Thanks, Barbara. Stavros, interested to hear your views around why ethanol is supported in so many other countries to the extent that it is, and not so much here in Australia so far.
Yeah, good question. I think predominantly going back many, many years ago, the global warming and the legislation about the Europeans and the Americans trying to come to a common understanding and agreement of reducing the emissions in light of global warming. And I think that's where it triggered everything off, and biofuels got involved and the technology advanced from there. So originally it came from the global warming. The countries united and agreed on the emissions, which have changed from where they were, where they are today, and the goalpost is continually moving. But that was originally what triggered it, even going down this pathway about changing the engine technology and using different fuels and types of fuels that they tried to use in different ratings in order to reduce their fleet. Today, they are penalised. Manufacturers are penalised if they don't meet the fleet requirements from their manufacturing in terms of the emissions collectively. So, everyone's working towards that direction, but predominantly it was global warming, the whole aspect about global warming and the effect of global warming that triggered this transition.
Yeah, great. Mark, there's been a few questions in the chat around biodiesel versus renewable diesel, and kind of looking at what's the longer term game in terms of having renewable diesel as a non-blended fuel, as a drop-in fuel. Keen to hear a little bit more from you in relation to, I suppose, those two fuels and the role that you see them playing now and into the longer term.
Yeah, sure. And I guess, look, the reason we're pushing a B5 mandate is because we actually have a biodiesel industry in Australia, and we could reboot that and get more bio into diesel in the short term. But certainly we're fully supportive of renewable. Renewable is a more expensive fuel to produce, so it will cost more for operators. So again, we'd be saying maximize bio, get to B5, and then start adding on top of that. So you could have start with a B5 mandate, then move to a B5 plus R5 mandate, and then continue. We could get to the point where potentially we had B5 R95. So we were, there was actually no sort of mineral diesel at all, sort of. And look, with the exception of, and I saw a question in the chat, the Japanese tend to be lagging behind in terms of their acceptance of renewable diesel. Certainly, the American brands and the Euro brands are happy to run R100 in their trucks. Mack and Volvo trucks produced in Brisbane leave the factory now full of R100. So sort of, they start their life on a full tank of R100. So no issues there. The Japanese will allow R50 as a blend at the moment. And I think it won't be too long as they do more testing that they'll come to the realization that their trucks will happily run on R100. But look, I think the reality is we're a long way away from running the whole fleet on anything like that. So I think let's start somewhere, and a good place to start is B5.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark. And I'll probably throw this one open to anyone who wants to have a go. But I understand that in the Australian fuel standards, E10 is actually specified as having a maximum quantity of ethanol. It doesn't set a minimum level of ethanol, which means that effectively you could be, filling up thinking that you're purchasing E10, and actually it's E2, which obviously is not doing a lot of good in terms of building the industry, but also the emissions reduction benefits and the like. So the question is, how can this be fixed? And, how can we, really get to a place where it is an actual 10%, not not a 2% sometimes. Barbara.
Yeah, so I can jump in. Having it be a mandate in the US is what caused this to work. It was the requirement under the renewable fuel standards that oil companies were required to blend in, and they actually tracked it, and there was lots of reporting, and the EPA did a very good job to help the mandate to succeed. And so, well, you're right that it could be E2. It's not E2 here in the US, right? We had to get rid of MTBE, right? MTBE contaminates groundwater as an oxygenate. Ethanol's not, right? It's almost 9 o'clock here. That's ethanol time in Detroit, right? Did y'all get that? Well, anyway, so but yes, we we it's renewable, and it got rid of a thing in the US that was bad. So it helps air quality, it helps global warming, it got rid of the bad MTBE, and it didn't take that long to move. As EPA finalized the rules here, folks got into work, and it was all done. Okay, not all. There were a couple of mom and pop, very rural gas stations. In about a year, it was just done. It was easy to do, and they moved forward. I think, the hardest part of the transition, well, in the US, there wasn't much propaganda in this space. I shared some of these quotes. There was an educational campaign that was driven by the government that everyone bought into, and the fear that I think Stavros talked about a little bit, it just all dissipated.
Yeah, maybe I
It's
can
Barbara.
just quickly
Yeah.
add. I don't know if that's true, Shahana. I mean, it's the perceptional thing, right? When you go to a petrol station, they say E10. So you're assuming as an Australian consumer that there are measures in place and legislation in place that we can monitor that the fuel that you're purchasing at the bowser is exactly what's advertised and you're charged for. So if we do have any of these, irregularities, let's say, or someone's trying to cut someone short, it's the people who are mixing the fuel, right? The actual, oil companies that are selling the fuel, they're the mixing station. So, I would be challenging that to say, bring that forward because that's an issue. If that's happening today in Australia, and maybe it's not done from the OEMs, from the oil companies, but done on a local basis. I'm not aware of anything like that. It hasn't come to our attention, but there is that perception, right? There is a perception because E10's carrying many, many years of baggage of, the fuel's not good for your car, and we've got to change that.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of the fuel quality standards, it does specify only a maximum. It doesn't specify a minimum level of ethanol.
Mhm.
And I think in terms of at the surface station or at the bowser, most of the labeling there says that it may contain up to 10% ethanol. So I think there's ways that it is being marketed in order to, not necessarily require a 10%. In New South Wales, the biofuels mandate does specify,
Correct.
so that supports in New South Wales a minimum level, which is fantastic. So we're kind of running out of time. We've got a couple of minutes left. And maybe Barbara, I mean, you've been involved in NVES here in Australia, so you'll probably be able to answer this question very quickly. But is there any benefit to NVES if E10 mandate is implemented?
Well, E10 is renewable, right? So that's directionally correct. Everything I listed that is, regardless of NVES or any other regulation, we already know that ethanol being burned, some portion of ethanol being burned in vehicles will be better overall regardless of the requirements. So NVES is a requirement upon the manufacturers, primarily. And so they've already done all their work. All the certification work, whether it's done in the US or done in Europe or Japan or China or anywhere to bring them into Australia, those vehicles have already been tested on E10. That's the certification fuel that's used to create all the data that gets shared with the customer about the individual vehicle that they're going to purchase. It's already done.
Thanks, Barbara. Mark, back to you. We have a question in the chat around, and you'll probably be able to do this one really quickly as well, but does the TIC modelling for CO2 abatement consider that the current fuel quality standards do permit B5 in our existing diesel?
Yes, yes, but the reality is that it's B.1. I think that sort of if you actually look at sort of how much bio is actually going into diesel in Australia, it is well less than even 1%. So so basically our modelling looked at mineral diesel being having virtually no bio in it at the moment. So those benefits that we see by actually mandating 5% bio were what was actually sort of shown on that graph I put up there, and that was factored into our modelling.
Yeah, great. And I'll just throw another question at you, which I think you talked about a little bit in your presentation. But there's a question here around the Truck Industry Council's view regarding the announcement by the federal government to implement a demand side measure. Keen to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, again, sort of very supportive of that. I mean, these fuels probably a bit different to ethanol, which is cheaper than petrol. But biodiesel or renewable diesel will make a litre of diesel more expensive. So we think the only way that we're going to actually sort of see low carbon liquid fuels and the take up in Australia, certainly for diesel, is with mandates and demand side measures. So then, and as I say, we believe that should start with bio and then sort of morph into renewable diesel as hopefully we create a renewable diesel in industry in Australia, because it doesn't make sense that we're sending our feedstock overseas only to buy it back at the moment. And we are buying renewable diesel, but it's all imported. Most of it's made from feedstock that actually left Australia.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark. And we've got a question here that I can probably answer. So it looks that ethanol and biodiesel production capacity in Australia is too much for the demand. Is some of that exported out of Australia, and does the New South Wales Biofuel Act contribute to the sale of biodiesel? So I can probably answer. So at the moment, that is correct. The capacity that we have across Australia within our existing ethanol and biodiesel refineries could be close to 650 million litres a year. At the moment, we're producing less than 200. So, significant opportunity for us to be able to increase that. Unfortunately, since the beginning of the crisis, we have seen the export of 27 million litres of renewable fuels out of Australia since the start of the crisis. So that is not ideal. And those fuels were sitting at price points that were cheaper than fuel at the Bowsers. So that's not a great outcome for Australian consumers either. And in relation to the New South Wales Biofuels Act for biodiesel, unfortunately, there has been a blanket exemption that has been provided on biodiesel for the 5 years that I have been participating in the New South Wales Biofuels expert panel, which is disappointing. So, hopefully we will be able to move to have some of those things shifted. And then I will probably answer the last question as well, which is to me, and it says, can I share any, updates or insights on the federal government's thoughts on low carbon liquid fuel policy shifts in relation to the demand drivers and mandates? So, as we kind of have highlighted today, the federal government did announce the commitment to developing a demand side measure in Australia across our fuel. And we understand that the government will be consulting soon. So we are all looking forward to receiving their consultation. So look, that has brought us to time. So I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you coming along and watching the event. This will be recorded and available on Bioenergy Australia's YouTube channel. You can also check out the other previous sessions that we have held. And we will be holding another webinar. So we're trying to do one every couple of weeks. We'll be holding another one in 2 weeks, which is going to be focused on policy movers that are taking place globally around low carbon liquid fuels, and a particular focus around countries that have done things since the fuel security crisis has really taken shape. So keep an eye out, and you will be able to see those details. Once again, thank you to the speakers. Really appreciate you taking the time, in particular, Barbara, over in the US. I'm ready to go to bed. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.